Alright, we're back in Senate Judiciary. It's April 10th. We are taking some testimony on page 118, and we have the Office of Racial Equity here to provide his thoughts on the bill.
Yeah, she's muted. So you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Good. Okay.
So the floor is yours. Feel free to share your thoughts on 820.
Awesome. I'll share my screen. Thank you all for having us. We appreciate the invitation to testify today on this bill. We have testified on it in House Judiciary, so this version is kind of similar, but it's a bit extended. So for the record, my name is Angela, but I'm Colombian, so the real pronunciation of my name is Angela Lazo Jimenez, and I am the policy person at the Office of Racial Equity. And this conversation is very important to me in a personal level and to the communities I belong, because as an immigrant person, a woman of color, a person with a particular immigration status, which is non-immigrant, non-resident, these like hate crimes are really an issue that we really care about. And I'd like to start by sharing the story of a family in a couple, some years ago. And they were Latinos and they bought a house and one of the neighbors was very violent and aggressive towards the family. And this man said that he will burn out the house with the family inside the house. And he also said that Latino people should go to their original countries. And he was like very unwelcoming and aggressive. So these kind of things happen in our state. And of course, this not only impacted the family, but also impacted the whole Latinx community in the state. And it spread a lot of fear. And this kind of issues or this kind of fear was spread when a couple of years ago, 3 Palestinian students were shot in Burlington while speaking Arabic and wearing traditional Palestinian clothes or scarves. So yeah, we do really believe that every time these kind of things happen, the entire state and all the historical marginalized communities who live in the state start questioning their safety in what they consider home, and it's a loss for us. There are some statistics that I would like to share with you all today about hate crime. The first one is that in Vermont, hate crimes have risen from 41 incidents in 2021 to 52 in 2023, which affects not only the family or the person who has been targeted, but the entire community they belong. And race, ethnicity, and ancestry-based crimes increased from 30 to 34. So this is a real issue. And that's why we appreciate and support this bill, because we recognize the importance of recognizing the group impact that each hate crime has. And we appreciate the shift towards a more person-centric terminology. However, this is only one step in the long line of steps that need to be taken in order to prevent hate crimes from happening and in order to support historically excluded communities in Vermont. So, how are we going to do this? What are the next steps? How to prevent hate crimes from happening? So, it's very hard to answer those kind of questions. There is no like a magical solution or something like that, but we would like to start the conversation, or we do believe as an office that it's important to start having those conversations around topics such as white supremacy, gun violence, and hate speech that sometimes can lead to hate crimes and create a lot of harm. So research has shown that white supremacy has been noted as a potential driving force, escalating hate and discrimination at disproportionate levels, and especially for communities of color or people who might sound or look like me. So we must acknowledge that this is an issue, and white supremacy is super ingrained in our society, and naming stuff matters. Education is in those topics is also super important. And according to the Human Rights Campaign, they said in one of their reports that you can find clicking here in the slides, they said that laws can help a lot, but they must be complemented with education and training initiatives that reduce prejudice and biases among everybody. So that's also key. And we do believe that it's important to bringing new voices into those conversations and supporting immigrants and asylum-seeking families in our state. And maybe this is not strictly related, but it helps the state to be a more diverse one. So our office also supports legislation who is trying to address related issues or related topics such as H375 or S5056, which creates the Office of New Americans who help immigrant families to arrive to our state and to stabilize them in a way, and H169, which addresses discrimination in public accommodations and housing. So again, it's very hard if we don't make this state a more diverse and welcoming one. How are we going to attract more people, and how are we going to attract diverse talent? So we gotta be thinking about that. Also, we do believe it's important to start having conversations around addressing gun violence. And according to the John Hopkins Center for Gun Violence Solutions, from 2013 to 2022, the overall gun death rate increased 30% in Vermont, and hate crimes and gun violence are things that are related. So here are some solutions they proposed, such as firearm purchaser licensing requirements, domestic violence protection orders, safe and secure gun storage practices, regulating the public carry of firearms, and community violence intervention programs focusing on those most at risk, which are usually communities of color or people with different diverse gender and sexual identities. So yeah, that conversations we do believe needs to happen.
So go ahead. There's a question.
Yeah, sure. I'm not watching the screen, so feel free to jump in.
What I'm wondering, and maybe it's in the link in your presentation, but if there are any examples of the community violence intervention programs you're talking about, because I'd love to talk more about that type of community investment.
Yeah, and it's such a good question. Thank you for asking. Basically, community violence intervention programs have at its core restorative justice. So they are more focused on restorative justice than punishment or prison as a solution for other structural problems such as mental health issues or lack of socioeconomic opportunities or over-policing communities of color. So the shift in those programs is more into recognizing the historical oppressions that some people and some communities experience, and instead of punishing or putting a lot of attention on that, the focus is more into fixing or trying to fix the harm those communities have suffered, and promoting education efforts. So I don't have examples right now, but the focus is more into restorative justice than more traditional approaches to justice. Yeah.
Wonderful, thank you.
Yeah. The other thing that we think it's important, it's about, or it's related to hate speech. And there is a huge, like, social media now amplifies online hate speech a lot. So we wanted to point or to highlight this project, which is a nonprofit project that takes place in Canada, called the Sentinel Project, and it has demonstrated these people have done a lot of research, and they have demonstrated that every time you monitor hate speech online, you can provide early warning indicators of violence that maybe can lead to real world violence. So they have a huge database called the Hate Base that tracks trigger words on social media platforms such as X or TikTok. And this is a way to um, try to do something before something really bad happens later. So this is good and this is necessary. And the United Nations has also mentioned the importance of uh, counter narratives. So every time we create counter narratives during hard political times or during politicals of polarization, this helps to deal with hate or hate speech online. So the United Nations in this policy brief published in 2023 really um, told the states and local government to start using those narratives to address hate speech and to promote diverse and pluralistic journalism. So this is like in a nutshell, our office really wants, like, we really appreciate this bill and support it, but we believe that it's important to start having those conversations that will lead us to prevent hate crimes from happening. And maybe some conversation starters can be around white supremacy or evidence-based gun violence prevention measures or better monitoring and counter narratives against hate speech or expanded education and training initiatives. So I just want to close by expressing solidarity with all victims of hate crimes that have happened in our state due to their race or religion or gender identity, disability, ethnic origin, immigration status, national origin. We do believe that all hate is harmful, and we believe as well that every time we make Vermont safer and more inclusive for historically excluded and marginalized communities, we create a better state for everyone. So yeah, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. Thank you all for having us.
So, just to confirm, the Office of Racial Equity supports H-118 as passed by the House. I'm assuming so. Yeah, okay, sure.
Yeah.
So as far as I am aware, we haven't made any changes to this bill. And I'm not suspecting that we plan to. Committee, are there any questions, comments?
No, I just want to hear from the Racial Equity.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Great. Well, thank you for coming in and for your presentation. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having us. Y'all have a good day.
As well. So I believe we were in a place where we're going to vote this out. Generally in support of this. Committee, is there any discussion that we want to have further on this? Good to go. So we can put it up for a vote a bit later after we get filled, come back and we can switch gears to.
Nice to meet you.
I'm sorry, I didn't know you were here from 118.
No, I was up in House Judiciary and Kayla sent me a notice, and so I just thought I just got done up there, so
Oh,
I'm
okay.
confident and see if y'all need anything, but.
Appreciate it. See you later. Thank you. That's right. And right on time. We have Sarah Robinson. Let's switch gears back to our budget requests. And I believe this is the last one that we have. And
Heard a lot of them, so, yeah,
yeah,
thank
so
you.
floor is
Thanks for having
yours.
me in. Yeah, thank you so much for having me in. For the record, Sarah Robinson, co-executive director at Vermont Network Against Domestic and Sexual Violence. Good to be with you all today. And just as a basic reminder, we are the state's leading voice on issues related to domestic and sexual violence. And we are also a membership organization, and our members are 15 independent nonprofits across the state that provide direct services to victims of domestic and sexual violence in the communities where you all represent. And these community-based services to victims are a critical part of the criminal justice response. And I think an often overlooked part of the criminal justice response. So the member organizations of the Vermont Network serve as the primary providers assisting victims of domestic and sexual violence with seeking court protection orders, civil protection orders. They respond to and assist survivors who are seeking forensic exams and evidence collection at hospitals 24 hours a day across the state. They house hundreds of families who are fleeing violence in emergency shelter. In 2024, our member organizations provided shelter to 1,400 survivors across Vermont, including nearly 500 children. And they accompany survivors to civil, family, and criminal court proceedings. And just to kind of put a finer point on all of that, I was thinking about the organizations that serve the areas that you all represent. And thinking about being just a few weeks ago, I was at Steps to End Domestic Violence in Chittenden County, where they, right at this moment, have their shelters completely full. They have 35 children living in shelter in families. Think about Voices Against Violence up in St. Albans area. And they just opened a second shelter actually in that region, and the Women's Freedom Center down in the Brattleboro area, which has been just such a solid organization for so long, providing services to victims across Winnet County. And despite the essential work that they all do, these organizations have been flat funded through Vermont's Domestic and Sexual Violence Fund for over 15 years. And while almost every other actor in the criminal justice system, when we think about the good work that prosecutors do, that defenders do, that law enforcement officers do, they have mechanisms to receive cost of living increases, but community-based advocates haven't received any increase in funding through the DVSD fund in over 15 years. That fund was established in 2008. I always feel it's special to talk about that fund in this room because it was established by Senator Sears. And its revenues are comprised of two primary sources of revenue. So a surcharge on marriage licenses and a surcharge on civil and criminal judgments. And with a percent of those surcharges, altogether, the fund right now generates about $784,000 total for the entire state. And then that $784,000 is dispersed across the state via a funding formula. And that funding formula really ensures that all regions of the state receive equitable resources. It takes into account things like the square miles served by those organizations, the populations in that region, whether an organization operates a shelter or not. And those revenues have experienced significant declines over the past 10 years. The fund has experienced a deficit every year since FY15, with the exception of one fiscal year. So this would be the 9th year in a row that we're back saying that there is a deficit in the fund in the current year. So in FY26 alone, the fund is again facing a shortfall of nearly $100,000. And in addition, the shifting federal landscape is posing very unique challenges to our field. Combined, our member organizations rely on $12 million in federal funding. Our member organizations' budgets are primarily federally funded. Federal funds represent up to 90% of their budgets. And I submitted to Kayla written testimony. I also submitted an article from just last week to kind of put a finer point on these federal funding challenges. But our primary sources of federal funding are through the Department of Justice Office on Violence Against Women and the Centers for Disease Control, the Violence Prevention Division. And just feel a responsibility to let you know that all of the grant solicitations at the Office on Violence Against Women have been pulled. There are none available at this point. And the Violence Prevention Division at the CDC was really decimated by staff cuts 2 weeks ago. There are actually no program officers remaining in the grant programs that fund our member organizations. And states across the country are experiencing layoffs already in domestic violence shelters and rape crisis centers. And this uncertainty is certainly, it's threatening the promise that we've made to Vermonters that services will be available in every community in the state 24 hours a day, wherever you need them. So we estimate that the special fund that currently generates just under $800,000 in revenue, in order to pay for services in Vermont, would need to generate somewhere in the realm of $5 million a year. But we know that that is not practical this year. We expect that conversation to continue to be a multi-year endeavor. But we are requesting this year an initial investment of $1.2 million in base funds, which is really essential to prevent cuts in our field. The House version of the budget came over with $450,000 dedicated to the Domestic and Sexual Violence Special Fund in one-time dollars. While we appreciate that gesture, we think the amount is insufficient and will still result in cuts. And we certainly are requesting that the Senate consider at a minimum preserving that 450. We would like to see it closer to the 1.2 million, and we'd certainly like to do those in base funds so that we're not back here every year asking around our deficits.
Sarah, how much approximately would be needed to avoid laying people off?
That's where our $1.2 million came from. That really is about what we think the aggregated need across the state is. I wanted to say, so that's kind of the our request in terms of the network. And I just wanted to say briefly, I watched Jennifer Pullman's testimony the other day, and you heard from her that the Vermont Center for Crime Victim Services, so they are the ones that administer the Domestic and Sexual Violence Special Fund. They actually administer several special funds, including victims' compensation and restitution. All of those special funds are in trouble. We also support their requests that they're making around comp and restitution. Certainly I'm here today to talk about the Domestic and Sexual Violence Special Fund. But I do think it is something that's worthy of our kind of more long-range planning. I know I had a conversation with Senator Morris about this, of just looking at those funds with some fresh eyes. Again, looking at the revenue sources and thinking about what they're currently paying for and what's possible into the future. And so we really appreciate the opportunity to come back to the committee in the future, if that's later this session or next session, or in the interim, just to discuss what that could look like. Any other questions for me?
Maybe that's
Yeah. Quick one, your special funds, Sarah.
Yes.
Can you just give us some historical background? What was the high? We know it's at 70 or now. Just
Yep. I can absolutely follow up with you. It has been over 1 million in the past. And it's been at 784 now for many years in a row.
and to follow up on the house's budget here, the 450, was that earmarked for the network or?
So in the web report, it says to go to the Domestic and Sexual Violence Special Fund.
What's up?
And we'd like to ensure that the House's intention remains in the Senate and that those funds do go to the DVSB fund.
Okay.
That being said, also, again, just want to state our support for, we know that the center has many funds that are in trouble, and we frankly, don't think we should be pulling from one pot of victim services to pay another. So we encourage the Senate to fully fund their costs as well.
My question is around safety and if there's been any analysis done as to the decrease in safety of victims and children and with decreases in the services that you offer. And maybe there hasn't, but logically, it seems that we would see an increase in domestic violence incidents, domestic violence murders with the lack of your service.
That is 100% true. And there is actually excellent national research on that indicates that when there are robust services available in communities, when there's shelter, when there's emergency response, when there's advocacy available to victims of domestic violence, the severity of injury decreases, murder rates decrease in communities, and when those services are not available, then those things increase in communities. So I'd be more than happy to follow up and share some of that with you. But there is really excellent research about the protective nature of these services for victims of domestic violence, but for the community at large. I always like to think about, when we think about, the causes of violence and what violence is looking like in our communities in Vermont. There is that statistic that nearly half of homicides in Vermont are domestic violence related, all homicides. And when we look across the country at mass casualty incidents, actually 2/3 of those usually have a genesis that's related to domestic violence. And so when we're able to provide services to victims so that they can leave violent situations earlier before violence escalates, it's not only protective for them, their children, and their families, but truly for the entire community.
So this sounds like a pretty critical public safety investment.
It absolutely is.
And the 1.2 is really the bare minimum. You're not asking for any type of building more robust services at this point in time.
1.2 will help us preserve services.
Would you say that the services are presently adequate and meeting the need?
Such a good question. I was in Senate Health and Welfare yesterday, speaking about the shelter system in Vermont. And I can tell you, domestic violence shelters are full. Prophecy, they are completely full. And we have survivors who are overflowing from those shelters into our hospital system. And while I will say I feel very, very confident and excellent about the work that our community-based advocates do. They're in court every week helping people apply for protection orders. They're answering the hotline in the middle of the night. They're providing services to children. They're doing prevention work in schools. I think that our organizations, like I have never heard them before, are expressing to me that they're increasingly worried that they're not going to be able to provide the same level of services if flat funding remains. There's really, they are very neat organizations.
Yeah, when I want to make it clear, I wasn't in any way tuning.
No,
I'm simply questioning whether we are putting adequate resources and making sure there are enough people doing the work support that work.
Yeah, I think that every community could benefit from more. That is true across the state from the Northeast Kingdom to Bennington.
Just a quick follow-up. Do you know the average length of stay in shelters? Yeah.
So it used to be when I came to the network just about 10 years ago that it was very common for people to come into shelter for say 30 to 60 days, get their feet underneath them, get some intensive case management and support, work with an advocate to find safe, permanent housing. Now we have survivors who are staying in shelter 6, even 12 months because they are unable to find permanent affordable housing in the community. The length of stay has definitely grown. We're providing many more bed nights than we used to per survivor and per family that's in shelter.
Are you also providing case management support services into the overflow into the hotels and motels and with the 80-day caps going into effect to people who are now being exited to the streets?
Yeah, so how that works, I'll just take steps to end domestic violence as an example in your district. So Steps has a large shelter. You know, they have, as I said, they have 35 kids currently living in the shelter in family arrangements. But we also, our member organizations in some regions of the state receive HOP grant money from the Office of Economic Opportunity, DCF, so that's Housing Opportunity Program grant money to operate motel overflows. So that's when the shelter is full, but there are people that are essentially facing the dilemma between staying in an unsafe and violent situation or unsheltered homelessness. And when that occurs, our programs have actually their own arrangements with local motels. It's not the same motels that are used for the GA program. And what they'll do is they'll put a family in a motel. They'll provide intensive case management. For example, Steps has an entire staff person, and that's all they do is work with families that are in motels, because the idea is we want to get those families into domestic violence shelters as quickly as possible. And so then as soon as there's an opening, they're able to transfer those folks in. The way that program is structured, that the 88-day cap doesn't apply to that overflow pool. But there are certainly TV survivors who are in the motel system just through the GA program, who, you know, we are on kind of a daily basis working with our member organizations to make sure those folks can stay housed, and maybe sometimes have to move around the state to find shelters. So.
Thank you. Any further questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
So the last piece of business for the letter is discussing this last ask, and then we're gonna vote on 118. Initial thoughts on this?
Yeah, in good conscience, make funding cuts to our domestic and sexual violence service providers.
Yeah. We don't have a handout, but my understanding, what was that? Yeah. My understanding is the House budget had 450,000 in one-time funds. And the ask is
In addition to base.
in addition to base funds.
Don't receive any.
Okay.
Yeah,
base funds.
right, that's the,
Okay.
so, and the ask was to convert that to 1.2 million as base funds. They don't have to revisit this every year. And I think they've been level funded since 2008.
For the past 15 years, there's been no increase.
Yeah.
I was given 450 in the building you market for the network versus putting these programs for Vermont victim services. Right to them, but they earmarked it specifically for that one.
I will say, so I obviously support the 1.2 million in base, and I've also, given that I flagged earlier exactly what Sarah flagged was all of those special funds being in trouble, I'm really happy to connect and try to look at what other revenue streams may be for the future. But I think, I mean, this is critical to the survivors, our community safety, like $1.2 million of the investment in critical public safety is the only responsible thing to do. And I'm happy to try to do some work in the off session about looking for other ways to.
Yeah, I think that would be great.
Can I ask, Sarah,
Yes.
do you remember the language we had in the BAA? I think it was,
Sunset.
there was that, but also, or maybe it didn't go in the BAA, we had talked about it for the budget, but making, it was basically putting a request into the general fund for you. Is that this, or is this?
That's it.
And the 1.2 with the amount?
That is our request. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so I had talked with the network early on about this. And I think you all were looking also for a revenue stream beyond this.
Yes, and
So the,
we've said that, really what it would take to fully fund core services is 5 million a year. We're realistic. And so the 1.2, we really back into in terms of what's gonna help us preserve core services.
so right now we have two pieces, getting rid of the sunset and this move from one time into base. And it's, as we worked out the language, it would be done in a transfer, rather than an appropriation, if I'm remembering.
I believe that is correct.
Okay, no, I support this. This is, part of a plan that we were talking about months ago. It got kind of derailed by the budget adjustment and all of that, but I would support this for sure.
So, just so I'm clear on this, Sarah, 784 special funds is an entity in itself, so you're requesting 1.2 in addition to the 784.
The 784 is generated by fines and fees.
Yep.
Yes, so the 1.2 would be general funds on top of the 784.
Okay.
And it would get distributed to 15 different organizations.
I view it kind of in the way that we did the bar foundation. You know, it's an existing way of getting money out to all of these groups. So efficient in that way.
Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I'll just piggyback on what Tanya was saying earlier about being able to fund this into the future. I know we've had conversations down hall in finance just about some members' uneasiness about how a marriage license fee goes towards a domestic violence. I remember when this came across Ways and Means probably 2 years ago. I had the same kind of uneasiness that it felt weird. I was actually getting married at the time, so she was a little weird. So that sunset that you're talking about, I go hand in hand, and kind of what you're going to be looking at, because it's
I have
really,
uneasy.
yeah, just really uneasy for me that part of your marriage license goes towards that.
Well, and if we come up with an alternate revenue stream, next year we can put that in place. But if we don't, then this,
This at least.
Yeah.
Prevents immediate cuts.
Yeah,
We had, Sarah and I had that conversation, that the present funding source is not working.
Yeah.
We need to find other alternatives, and when Connor brought up, I said, great, she can work through that.
I would love to work with any of you on it.
I'm also on board with 1.2, so seems pretty straightforward.
I guess no, I shared that uneasiness when I learned that
Yeah.
license fees. I was like, that's a leak.
So regarding this letter, I'll make changes tonight regarding everything that we revised, and I'll send that out tonight or tomorrow morning, and we can all take a look at it and just make sure that it all looks accurate based on everything we discussed, and then I'll send it over to appropriations tomorrow. So. Cool. All right. We go back. H118. Yes. Thank you. You made no changes to this. We got a good amount of testimony on it. Any questions or concerns that want to discuss?
it seems like it's super straightforward. I didn't say that.
You never say those words.
is this
Say
the
quiet and
second or third time not amending a House Judiciary bill?
Second, that I know, where's, the first one was raise the age.
we wanted to.
We didn't do a thing without,
Yeah.
We should just remind House Judiciary of.
when they're messing around with
Yeah.
45, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll meet with them today.
Remind them of that, please, Senator Norris.
We got other bills of theirs that we're making some big changes to. I mean, this one is one line, so, you know, 2 lines, but
But there's still 2 bills that went out.
Yes.
They changed. One.
They owe us.
Yeah.
She didn't want to say that.
I'll make sure to deal with that. All right, I entertain a motion to, open up paper.
Do that.
Any further discussion? Great. Senator Mattis, please call the roll.
Senator Norris,
Yes.
Senator Bihowski,
Yes.
Senator Barun,
Yes.
Senator Meadows, yes, Senator Machine,
Yes.
5-0, sir. Great. We'll, want the report.
Would be happy to report it unless anyone else has a burning desire to do so.
We can let you report all the bills.
Yeah, that's fine. Great. Probably run it up tomorrow by myself next day.
I mean, if you're feeling
Or I can
overwhelmed,
pass it.
I'm happy to report it.
I do have purpose to get here.
Let me think.
We'll let you know who's gonna report it.
Oh,
Yeah,
I wrote down Robert.
think on it for a day. I have to look there.
There.
I think we are all set.
Now we're getting some wires too.